Merhaba arkadaşlar, hoş geldiniz. And that's all of my Turkish. But I do have a history of commenting on Turkish politics on this channel. It's been a while since I have done so. And I think the meeting between Biden and Erdogan is a good chance to catch up. Welcome to live programming here at the More Freedom Foundation. A few baseline rules. If you're new here, you'll notice that there is a chat where you are encouraged to pile in, express your thoughts and opinions. You're allowed to be as aggressive as you want towards me. Say what you want, do what you will about me, my personal appearance, my opinions. My Chipolju poster behind me, I'm just noticing, maybe I should have taken that down. Go nuts. But the rules are simple. You have to be civil to each other. I do not accept folks who folks are definitely encouraged to argue, but they're not allowed to attack each other. Also, you're not allowed to disrupt the chat. We have a moderator, Logo Cool Extreme. What he says goes. There is no court of appeal from Loga. If he decides that you are being disruptive to the chat and should be removed, he will remove you. Listen to what Loga says. I think with that, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to talk for about, half hour, 45 minutes, maybe as long as an hour. I'm going to do sort of my presentation on the Biden-Erdogan meeting, what little there is to say about that, and also just general misconceptions and the main problems in Turkish-U.S. relations at this point. I've got a little bit of jawing about Erdogan and his prospects. Despite the fact that I haven't really, other than this morning, I haven't made a really deep study of Turkish politics recently. But I think I do have enough background that it's worth talking about. As someone asked in the chat, I guess it's long enough that folks don't know this. The reason I'm so invested in Turkish politics is I lived there for 6 years between 2011 and 2017. I was pretty... I guess 2011 and 2016, and then I would go back for 3-month stints. I love Turkey deeply. I love Istanbul deeply, and miss it almost every day. I've fallen away from commentary on Turkey on this channel a bit. So I thought it might be fun to dive back in. So I'm going to do the presentation. That should take half hour, 45 minutes, an hour. And then I'll have Q&A for an hour or so when I'll dive into the comments. If you have any questions you want to ask me, I would ask you to hold them until then. If you want to do super chats, I love super chats. It's best to wait until Q&A. I definitely answer all the questions with the super chat attached to them. So I guess let's get into it. This is kind of opportunistic. I felt like it had been a while since I talked about Turkey, and it's halfway through the month, so it's time for a big public live chat. Just using the hook of the fact that Joe Biden, the president of the United States, and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey, have met for the first time since Joe Biden became president. It's an interesting dynamic between Biden and Erdogan. They've known each other for years. They've interacted with each other for years. I actually remember partying with some of Biden's advance team when he came to Turkey, I think the last time as vice president, in an attempt to sort of smooth things over after the coup attempt in Turkey in 2016. Biden and Erdogan certainly know each other well. The dynamics are different now, of course, because Joe Biden is the president of the United States instead of being sort of the number two, debatably powerful fiddle. Joe Biden is, I think it's fair to say, the most powerful man in the world, which made for an interesting meeting. I think what most people will tell you if you look into it, and I think is a very accurate read on one level, is that it was not a very interesting reading. Many commentators claimed that the Turkish government was really, hyping this up and claiming that there were big expectations and things were going to go really well. And I think, as most of the same commentators predicted, not very much came out of it. I think, however, there's a slight misjudging of sort of how this works here, because absolutely, the official story that nothing concrete came out of this meeting, and nothing concrete was ever likely to come out of this meeting is accurate. That's the truth. The sort of the big takeaway quote. I think both Erdogan and Biden said something along these lines, as they both said, there's nothing in our relationship. There are no problems that we can't solve, which of course means that, it's essentially saying there's nothing we can't solve, and we didn't solve anything. But I don't think anybody really expected anything to be solved. I want to push back on the idea a little bit that this was completely meaningless, because it's not completely meaningless. Erdogan got a meeting with Biden. It is, it was just 90 minutes. It was no doubt full of bullshit boilerplate, and each side talking about their positions with little understanding or acceptance of the other side's positions. But it is real diplomacy. It is real interaction. And especially in a context where I don't believe there's much happening on lower levels of interaction between Turkey and the United States, it is meaningful that the presidents of the countries sat down together. I believe that they have some serious, Turkey and the Turkey-U.S. relations have some serious problems that I'll be talking about that are going to be very difficult to resolve. But I think what this meeting is nothing, because it symbolizes that at the highest levels, U.S. and Turkey, if not willing to resolve any of these issues, they're willing to sort of keep the status quo limping along. I see a lot of commentary that's like, how long can this impasse continue? And I'm here to tell you, I think this impasse can continue for a lot longer, because as I pointed out in the past, there's a lot of real money in the U.S.-Turkish relationship. Despite what some folks and some Washington, D.C. think tanks might want, Erdogan is not the leader of a country like Iran or Syria or Iraq or Venezuela that either is not important economically, or in Venezuela's case, no longer is important economically. It is not a place that can be isolated. It is not a place that can be sort of left to the vagaries of the U.S. military-industrial complex entirely. It can't become an opposition country. This does not mean that any of the problems are going to get solved. This does not mean that the United States has any interest in helping Turkey with any of its foreign policy and economic disasters in sort of that we're seeing with sort of late stage Erdogan. But it does mean that the U.S., it is a sign that at least Biden and I believe the Biden administration as a whole is interested in sort of continued inertia, and what I do think this does signify, and why I do think the Turkish government isn't entirely wrong to make a big deal about it, is like folks who are, maybe these are folks, I don't think these folks are just on Twitter. I think there is a serious sort of think tank constituency in Washington, D.C. that wants to at least threaten things like, oh, we're going to boot Turkey out of NATO, or, oh, we're going to do some real sanctions on Turkey. And I think that this meeting does kind of shut them up. Not saying that U.S.-Turkish relations are going to improve in the slightest. I guess this is actually kind of a lot like, I'm going to make a couple references to sort of Israel here. There's a lot of folks who are like, well, Israeli policy can't possibly continue this way. And it's sort of like, well, actually, it kind of can. Things can continue with sort of a situation normal, all fucked up for quite some time. And I think that U.S.-Turkish relations are probably going to continue at this sort of stagnation level for years to come, without any big switch in either direction. We're not gonna go. You're not gonna see Erdogan having a big state dinner and walking arm in arm with Biden for a weekend or something like that. You're not going to see a big step up in NATO involvement. But by the same token, you're not going to see any big breach. That's the message I get from this meeting. The other parallel, it's interesting. I was talking about this with a family member who's a very sort of very stereotypical U.S. conservative who is a big fan of Israel and hates Erdogan. And it's sort of interesting talking with him and pointing out, well, actually, Erdogan and Netanyahu are very similar political figures. They are both extraordinarily talented political figures who have really, really warped their democratic systems in very serious ways. I would not say that Israel for Israelis still has a democratic system, and probably for Israelis has a stronger democratic system at this point than Turkey does. But I think it is very, very interesting how both Netanyahu and Erdogan are these extraordinarily forceful personalities, they're both sort of political geniuses who have taken their countries in very, I would say, negative directions. After, I would say, well, I mean, I don't know enough about Israeli politics, so I'll stop talking about that. But in Turkey, it's sort of Erdogan and the AK Party did a lot of good for Turkey, but we've been in a period of pretty strongly diminishing returns for about 8 years now. It ain't great. So the other parallel between Netanyahu and Erdogan I wanted to talk about is they both got sort of caught out by Trump. They both got sort of trumped in interesting ways. Erdogan, Netanyahu, both very savvy, very politically powerful figures who had figured out how to make their system work for them. And I think they both thought they had found a kindred spirit in Donald Trump. Were both sort of caught out in November 2020 to realize that, in fact, Donald Trump is a guy who talks a good game and speaks as if he's a politically savvy, clever guy who can make a system work. Unfortunately for Trump, he was working in a much stronger, more consolidated system than Turkey or Israel, and was frankly defeated by it, and was not, frankly, was never really in control of the apparatus of the U.S. government the way that Erdogan and Netanyahu were in control of the apparati of the Israeli and Turkish governments. And it's sort of an interesting fact where we've seen over the past couple days, Netanyahu has lost. He's out. And I think it's to me that I haven't seen anybody else talk about this, but I do think that Netanyahu's quick ejection after, I think, years of agony and 4 elections in an attempt to unseat him has a lot to do with the switch from Trump to Biden and the very poor bet that Netanyahu made on Donald Trump. Erdogan also made a very poor bet on Donald Trump and what Donald Trump would let him get away with. I think it was interesting that the new war with Gaza initially seemed to have saved Netanyahu, but when it became clear how massive the international outpouring and definitely more importantly, the negative outpouring of responses in the United States was, I think it became very clear to folks in the Israeli system, even very conservative, very anti-Palestinian, very pro-settler elements in the Israeli government, that it was time for Netanyahu to go because he had overcommitted to Trump and Trump's Republican Party. The fact that this Gaza war got so much more hate in the United States, despite the fact that it killed literally 10% as many Palestinians as the 2014 war did, I think was a very clear indicator that Netanyahu had fucked up and it was time for him to go. And he's gone. I mean, he's still a very powerful political figure, still it's entirely possible that 2 weeks from now, it'll be Prime Minister Netanyahu again. But I don't know. It seems a little less likely to me. Erdogan, I think it can be tempting to look at Erdogan and say, ooh, maybe the same thing will happen. because he is a figure that has bet bet way too heavily on his relationship with Donald Trump and lost. I think that's over optimistic. I think Erdogan will survive this. I think the fact that this meeting happened is an indication that will happen. Biden is perfectly willing to work with Erdogan, whereas I don't want to get over my skis and say that Biden wasn't willing to work with Netanyahu, but I certainly don't think Biden was heartbroken to see Netanyahu falling, and I wouldn't be entirely shocked if there was some kind of behind-the-scenes Biden administration, like, hey, you know what, like, we're going to be more cooperative in shutting down the progressives in the U.S. Congress if you just fucking finally get rid of Netanyahu. It would not surprise me in the slightest if that was the case. But who knows? I mean, straight up quid pro quo, for that resolution calling out Ilhan Omar for Netanyahu's fall. I think that's probably a little too simple-minded, but it also wouldn't shock me. So the fact that Biden has met with Erdogan, even if it is it is important to emphasize that this meeting didn't happen in Ankara or Washington, D.C. This happened at Brussels at the sidelines of a NATO summit. Erdogan was given an hour and a half. It was not a big embrace, but it was, Erdogan's there. We got to work with him. Let's see, let's state our positions and be civil. So I think what we're seeing here is a message of sort of civil stagnation. And as is perhaps not the case, or is the case in very different ways with Netanyahu and Israel, there are some really, really, really fundamental differences between Turkey and the United States that are completely free of the personalities of the people who are the president. These would continue to be problems. If Meral Akşener or Ekrem İmamoğlu was the president or prime minister of Turkey, there'd be problems if Donald Trump was still the president of the United States. These are really, really fundamental things that are not going to go away. And I also think they're fundamental misunderstandings. I just don't think the people in the U.S. foreign policy bureaucracy grasp how important the sort of PKK, SDF, Rojava issue is to the Turkish government and anybody who's going to be in Turkish government. And I don't think anybody in the Turkish government really grasps just how important the S-400 issue is for the U.S. government. And I think it's these two really fundamental issues, fundamental misunderstandings that are standing in the way. And it's frustrating to me because I don't think the S-400 is as important to the Turkish government, important enough to the Turkish government to justify the damage it's doing to U.S.-Turkish relationships. And I know that the Syrian Kurds are not important enough to the United States to justify the extraordinary damage that it is doing to the U.S.-Turkish relationship. And let's be clear here. It's easy for people who are Erdogan opponents like myself, for people in the United States to claim that it's somehow Turkey that's the bad guy here. And no, it is the United States that started it, not just in my, typical blame America first way where the U.S. is the most powerful actor in every situation. So therefore they're the ones most responsible for it. No, it's actually quite straightforward. The problems here, the problems between the United States and Turkey started with the war in Syria, which is ironic because the war in Syria started out as a collaborative U.S.-Turkish project. This project was the Get Assad project. It is very clear, this incredibly persistent mythology that the United States didn't do anything or didn't do enough in Syria or didn't do enough to fight Assad is horseshit. The United States has been heavily involved in attempting to destroy Syria since 2011. It is, and I think we've only got really good reporting at this point about stuff that happened a little later in 2012 and 2013. But I think we've got pretty solid reporting talking about how The Obama administration was working in clandestine ways to overthrow Assad. Well, I mean, the U.S. government has been working to overthrow Assad for decades, but in the aftermath of the Arab Spring protests in Syria, which the United States ambassador and no doubt more surreptitious means worked to foster and sponsor from the very beginning. Yeah, I mean, the U.S. and Turkey were working hand in glove very clearly, attempting to overthrow Assad. This involved, from the very beginning, funding very liberally jihadist elements. It is fucking fascinating to me and fascinating in not a good way, that it continues to be some kind of surprise or shock or brought to people's attention as if it's strange that Turkey at certain points was supporting the Islamic State or supporting Al-Qaeda. These revelations have again become a big issue in Turkish politics because of the revelations of the mafioso Sedat Peker. I'll talk about him later. But it's annoying to me. Even folks I follow on Twitter who are really good, I think, on Syria, folks like Max Abrams will talk about and damn it, Turkey's been supporting Al-Qaeda the whole time. And it's just so fundamentally dishonest to say that and not point out that it's Turkey and the United States. Turkey has supported jihadists in Syria since 2011 and continues to support jihadists in Syria because the United States asks them to. It is a collaborative project. This month, in June of 2020, the United States public broadcasting system, so it's Frontline, is a PBS show. I think they're funded by foundations, probably more than by government itself. But regardless, it is public broadcasting in the United States. At the beginning of this month, released a glossy documentary talking about how great Al-Qaeda in Syria is. It's absurd. I think it's called The Jihadist, and it features members of the Trump administration and Al-Jolani himself, one of the highest value Al-Qaeda targets left in the world, talking about how great it is that Al-Qaeda and the U.S. government work together in Syria. So I don't quite understand why it's so shocking that that it's a new revelation that Turkey was supporting, jihadist elements. I guess you could get hung up on the distinction between the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda and Ahrar al-Sham and But I've talked about before how that's a sham. That's a ridiculous thing to get hung up on. I mean, we talk about narcos in Mexico, and does it really matter if the U.S. government was funding weapons to the Zetas or to the Sinaloa, cartel? Who gives a fuck? It's people that are in the same business of jihadi terrorism. Many of them worked together in Iraq to kill U.S. soldiers. I think that's acknowledged. That's something that our big Al-Qaeda allies in Idlib did. So yeah, I don't quite understand why it continues to be this big, shocking, controversial thing to acknowledge that Turkey supported jihadists in Syria. The United States is doing big, glossy promotional materials on its public broadcasting station for Al-Qaeda this month. It's an incredible bit. Now, and I understand why people, it is newsworthy. It should be emphasized to the Turkish public that, yeah, look, this is what your government does. It supports ISIS. It supports Al-Qaeda. That's worth, drawing people's attention to. It just pisses me off in the U.S. context where it's this is how the folks who want to kick Turkey out of NATO justify themselves. They're like, oh, well, they supported the Islamic State. It's yes, because we asked them to. They supported jihadists in Syria. It's who the F do you think we're supporting in Syria? Idlib is run by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is, an Al-Qaeda affiliate. And they get a lot of funding from USAID, from the U.S. government. Like, we are openly and quite clearly supporting jihadists in Syria to this day. One of the few very good things that Donald Trump did was he cut off Timber Sycamore, which was the program of heavily arming jihadists in Syria that the CIA was involved in, estimated to be one of the largest CIA programs of all time. Trump did stop that, but we're still openly sending humanitarian aid, government support to Idlib, which is run by Al-Qaeda. So anyway, I'm falling down this rabbit hole because it really, really pisses me off. What changed was one of the Turkish and U.S. proxies in Syria, one of the militias that we were funding to attack the Syrian government, known as the Islamic State, got out of hand. What's kind of interesting is my understanding is that both Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and Jilani were sent from Iraq to go and work together to take down Assad. And yes, there was a split there. Yes, the Jilani's Al-Qaeda HTS group absolutely did fight with the Islamic State group, just like in Mexico, the one group of narcos fights another group of narcos. They're all still narcos, we shouldn't be picking favorites. Maybe we should be picking favorites when it comes to narcos, but that's a completely different story. Narcos provide a service. Jihadis do not. They provide death and destruction. Narcos, provide fun nose candy. No, that's a completely different rant. The problem was this Islamic State proxy that the Turkish and U.S. governments have been supporting so gleefully, whether or not they are willing to admit it to themselves, got out of hand in 2014 and sort of started destabilizing the Iraqi government. And the United States decided that this was something they had to be concerned about. U.S. media really liked how telegenic and scary the Islamic State was, and quickly latched on to things like Kobane, which brought up another fact in the another aspect of the conflict in Syria. The Kurds in Syria were never really rebels against Assad. They never have been. They have worked quite closely with Assad throughout the Syrian civil war, and would continue to quite happily do so if the United States hadn't decided that they were the perfect folks to use to fight against Islamic State, our out-of-control proxy. The problem here, of course, is that, and I think I have been guilty of this in the past. I'll just talk about Syria's Kurds or the Kurdish thing. I've been guilty of this in the past, and U.S. media is definitely guilty of this because they love to portray Erdogan and Turkey as like a bunch of out-of-control genocidal maniacs going after all the Kurds. And while there is definitely a real human rights critique that should be made about Erdogan's treatment of Kurds in Turkey and Syria, especially after 2015, that is an unfair way to characterize the Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, the YPJ, there's a whole range of acronyms, because this is not the Kurds, the folks who are in control in northern Syria right now, the folks in control of U.S. Syria who work very closely and heroically with the United States against the Islamic State. They're not the Kurds. They are a specific group of Kurds who are closely aligned with the PKK. This is not, and the PKK is a terrorist group designated by the Turkish government and the U.S. government. The PKK is a terrorist group that has, over the past decades, killed something like 40,000 people. Now, that's, of course, a little unfair. I mean, that 40,000 number, are we talking about Kurds killed by the Turkish government? Regardless, it's a very serious, vastly more serious war between the Turkish government and the PKK that the U.S. has ever fought against Al-Qaeda. I mean, we're doing promotional reels for Al-Qaeda figures now. We never fought against the main state sponsor of Al-Qaeda, Saudi Arabia. It's a joke. the Turkish conflict with the PKK is not a joke. The PKK is still dedicated to the dismemberment of the Turkish state, to carving it open, to taking parts of Turkey and making it part of a different country. That is a desperately serious terrorist organization that works against the integrity of the Turkish state. And in 2014, the United States started allying with it to fight the Islamic State. This is really key, and I apologize if I am harping on this too much. But I think if the person in charge of Turkey was a little bit saner and a little less populist and a little more capable of making Turkey's case without being insulting, and then I don't think this ever would have happened, because it's honestly outrageous. It's like the United States openly allying with and funding the IRA. I mean, you can argue that to some extent the United States funded the Irish Republican Army, a terrorist organization that worked against the British state. We certainly did, but that was, like a proxy thing. This would be like U.S. Special Forces going to Northern Ireland and working directly with the IRA as it was fighting against the British. Like, that's the level of what we're talking about here. It's freaking insane. It is, it's a lot like the United States going to Syria and allying with Al-Qaeda as it tries to take down the Syrian government. It's quite crazy. And the idea that we would do this against Turkey, a government that has been a treaty ally for 70 years, is also a top 20 economy. It's just like, it's insane is what it is. And the fact that under the Obama and Trump administrations, U.S. media just portrayed this as, it's just a la-di-da fun thing we're doing, look, they've got female fighters in the SDF. Isn't that adorable? Like, yeah, the Turks have very, very real reason to be pissed off about this. And the thing about this that's so frustrating is that it would be really easy to resolve. Like, the United States taking its troops out of Syria, which are all, I believe they're all, well, I guess we've still got troops in Al-Tanf as well, but like the vast majority and the most significant U.S. forces are still supporting the SDF, the YPG, the PKK. There's a lot of acronyms here, but the sort of the group that controls northeastern Syria. Most of the U.S. troops are there. If we pulled out those troops, remember what I said, I think it absolutely is legitimate to be concerned about what the Turkish government troops that are also occupying parts of northern Syria, what they would do to our heroic anti-Islamic State allies. But like I said earlier, the Kurds are not rebels against Assad. They've worked closely with Assad throughout this war. That's broken down a little bit in recent years when the United States has been, consciously forcing them to act against Assad. But it wouldn't be too difficult for the Kurds in northern Syria to get back together with Assad and the Russians. I think it would happen, especially in the context of the U.S. getting out of there. And instead of the northern Syria being this weird, like, oh, who knows who's fighting who, it will solidify into a very clear Turkish-Russian Cold War thing. The Kurds would be very useful to Assad, which would guarantee their continued survival. Syria could consolidate. It would be the best possible thing for the United States to just get out of there. It would be good. I think it would lead to a sort of another Cold War frozen conflict in Syria, but it'd be a Cold War between Russia and Turkey. So it's not really our problem, which is kind of ideal. And would make it even easier to sort of squash Iran out of that entirely, whereas keeping U.S. troops there, which are extraordinarily damaging to the U.S.-Turkish relationship, are also extraordinarily damaging to the stability of the region, and quite pointless. Unfortunately, as I pointed out before, one of the main goals of the United States in the region, the main goal of the United States in the region is to sell weapons. And one of the main ways to sell weapons is to foster instability. And one of the main reasons the U.S. troops are still there, even though their anti-ISIS mission has essentially been accomplished, and actually they're continuing to be there, actually makes it easier for ISIS because ISIS profits from the chaos that U.S. troops create. The U.S. doesn't want Syria to be stable. The U.S. wants Syria to stay unstable so it can continue to sell weapons. It's depressing, but it's what it is. So let's talk about timeline here. Something else this also gets to the misunderstanding that Erdogan had with Trump. Trump and Erdogan famously had a rapport. They're both sort of old-fashioned strongmen, but Erdogan is an old-fashioned sort of strongman who's good at his job, knows his government, knows what he's about. Donald Trump is an old-fashioned strongman who's a fucking idiot, has no idea what he's doing, never really understood what the powers and details of the government institution he was nominally in charge of were, and didn't really understand Middle Eastern policy in the slightest. What he did understand was he liked talking to Erdogan. He liked Erdogan's image. He sort of, liked the idea of a strongman like Erdogan. So he was friendly to Erdogan. This was essentially meaningless as far as U.S.-Turkish relations. Not meaningless, but it was meaningful in that it convinced Erdogan he could get away with more than he actually could. It's something that's really been dropped down the memory hole by just about everybody, but it was actually under Donald Trump that the U.S. escalated its participation in the war in Syria. In November 2015, in the context of the anti-Islamic State fight, Obama first put in special forces, U.S. special forces. First openly put in U.S. special forces. Quite confident that U.S. special forces were doing all manner of horse shit in the Syrian war long before November 2015. But in November 2015, it was acknowledged that U.S. special forces were on the ground. There's gradations here. There's levels here. To acknowledge that special forces are on the ground and are fighting and are being photographed, that's still a level of deniability. That's still a level of, well, we're not really there. It's just special forces. They might have bases there, but they're not really based there. And they're not really, if people die, it could be deniable. It's not permanent. It was actually under Donald Trump that I think it's an MEU, Donald Trump in March of 2017 sent in the Marines. That was the first official, open, non-special forces, real deployment of U.S. troops, which, that's real. That's non-deniable. That's something that is ongoing. It was, I think, a Marine Expeditionary Unit. Is that the right acronym? So yeah, it was actually during the reign of Donald Trump, Erdogan's great pal, that the troops from the U.S. the boots actually hit the ground. The real official boots hit the ground in Syria, which was very much not what Erdogan wanted. And I think it's really key to remember that story of, I think it was 2 or 3 times that Trump said, "Oh, I'm definitely pulling my guys out of Syria," and Erdogan was like, "Thank you, that's great. I'm glad you're doing that." And then the people who worked for Trump were like, "Fuck no, you're not." That happened like 3 times. Trump did not have the capability that Trump thought he did, that Trump's followers thought he did, or that Erdogan thought he did. Which brings us to the S-400 issue. And I think I want to point out that this is this is exactly as extreme a miscalculation on the Turkish government's part as it is on the U.S., as the affection for the PKK in Syria is on the U.S. government's part. Like, the U.S. support for a PKK-aligned group in Syria is an absolute red line, absolute not going to work, absolute nightmare thing for the U.S. government to do that is not going to be acceptable to any Turkish government. What Erdogan has done with the S-400 is exactly, as maybe even more, of a red line and an impossibility for the U.S. government to accept than the PKK thing is. Like, it's exactly that. Actually, it's more, because at the end of the day, I mean, like Turkey like lives there. Turkey like cares about what happens in the Middle East. The United States does not give a shit about what happens in the Middle East. I think that's really important to emphasize. What the U.S. gets out of the Middle East is instability. They love instability. My government loves instability because it loves to sell weapons. That's all we're interested in. We want to make money. Congress people want defense contractors to put factories in their districts, employ people, and give them money. So we want to sell weapons. That is what all of U.S. foreign policy has been about since the fall of the Soviet Union. There is no higher value. There is no higher good. I think a lot of people have this idea, a lot of Turkish people have this idea that some really real world things like Turkey's the biggest military in NATO. Turkey is incredibly strategically important. It controls the reaches to the Black Sea. It's probably the biggest power on the Mediterranean, or biggest. It is absolutely the most significant military power in the It's in the Eastern Mediterranean. I mean, Italy, France, that's a real military power, but that's off in the West. Turkey is a huge deal, big military. Fascinating military industrial complex, building the drones, all really important. The United States couldn't give a shit. We don't care. We really don't care. We care. One of the reason that Turkey is going to hold on to its NATO position isn't because there's some incredible strategic value that the United States finds in the Turkish alliance. It's because there's a lot of McDonald's in Turkey, and we want to keep the flow of business and money. It's money we care about. It's not this idea that Turkey is some invaluable strategic ally. And this S-400 thing undermines everything. The S-400, which is a Russian missile system that Turkey bought, means that we can't sell Turkey the F-35. And because of sanctions that have now been put on, because of how seriously we care about the S-400, it looks like going forward, I'm not too sure on the mechanics of this, but because of the sanctions that we've put on the Presidency of Defense Industries, which is sort of my understanding is a coordinating body for defense procurement for Turkey, because of that, we're not going to be able to sell much of any weapons. I mean, I'm sure some contracts that are already settled are still going forward. We like making money. But yeah, like our big ticket, item, make an absurd amount of stupid money for a stupid piece of shit weapon, the F-35. If Turkey's not in that, that's a real problem for us. That's an existential problem for the U.S.-Turkish relationship. And no, again, because there's so much other economic weight in U.S.-Turkish relations, we're not going to abandon Turkey. We're not going to But if Turkey has some kind of idea that we're going to be a valuable foreign policy partner, that we're going to help them with aid for their economy, or we're going to help them with the Russo-Turkish Cold War they've got going, or we're going to do positive things in North Africa together, none of that's happening. While the S-400 is thing. This is what we care about in the United States. We care about selling weapons. This is absolutely fundamental, and I think it's really Erdogan is a smart guy, a strong politician, and I think this S-400 thing is one of the dumbest fucking things he's ever done. I think it is, and the problem here is he has committed to this, and I think he's made the S-400 sort of it's like a thing for him. It's like an emblem of his power, and it's an emblem of his foreign policy and his choices, and it's a dumb fucking choice. Because look, I talk a lot about the Russo-Turkish Cold War, how Turkey's on the upswing and Russia's on the downswing, and it's good from the U.S. perspective. We can be able to stand back and say, okay, let these guys tussle. Without NATO, without active U.S. support, again, Turkey's not going to lose NATO, but it has lost, I think, to a degree, active U.S. support. Without the U.S. support, Turkey's not yet a real competitor to Russia. Russia's got the nukes. Russia's got the Navy. Russia's got the naval bases. Well, not many, but Russia's still much more of a thing without Turkey. That's sort of the crazy thing about Erdogan's big, like, new Ottoman dreams, new, like, the new Turkish empire or whatever, is it's all based on this bedrock of NATO participation, being a NATO military. U.S. is the silent partner backing us up. And throughout the Syrian civil war, like, NATO folks have delivered Patriot missile systems and have delivered things when Turkey has asked for it, when it has felt vulnerable. So, like, yeah, like this. I think Erdogan assumed that Turkey had some kind of existential, and Turkey does have strategic value to Europe. That it does have. But again, the United States doesn't give a shit. NATO exists for the United States since the end of the Cold War, so it can sell weapons. That's the whole point. And by doing this S-400 thing, Erdogan has truly, truly fucked up. To be clear, the idea that one of the standard lines is that, Erdogan only got the S-400, and he actually said this, I think, after his meeting with Biden, was, oh, no, we only got the S-400, the Russian missile system, because the U.S. wouldn't sell us Patriots, which is, respectfully speaking, horseshit propaganda. I posted in the link below this video the timeline, I believe, from U.S. government officials of what actually happened with the Patriot and the S-400. And to be clear, that too is horseshit propaganda. But if you look at the timeline, the U.S. officials' version is a lot more credible than Erdogan's version. It's quite straightforward. What Erdogan wanted, the reason that there was never a problem if Turkey wanted to buy Patriot missiles from the United States, that would have been A-OK. The thing was, Turkey was driving a harder bargain, as it should. What Turkey wanted was technology transfer. It wanted the ability not just to own Patriot missiles or a Patriot missile system that it could use. It also wanted more and more of the technological know-how. It didn't want to be like Saudi Arabia. These are very complex systems, and like Saudi Arabia has all the best systems in the world, can't maintain them, can barely run them without U.S. government contractors and folks. Turkey obviously is a lot more complex than that, and is always, I think, generally for most systems, is able to run them. But what Turkey wanted was, guarantee that, the Turkish military would be able to run their own Patriot systems, and then would also be able to manufacture its own Patriot systems. And that's a negotiation, because again, U.S. government loves selling weapons because a lot of weapons are made in the U.S. But there is give and take on this, and it was a decades-long negotiation where technology transfer and the degree of technology transfer that the U.S. would allow to go to Turkey was the sticking point. This is I think the great point that was made in that article that I've linked in the description, was that Putin offered to allow Erdogan to buy the S-400 in July of 2017. In September of 2017, this is after like a decade of negotiation of the Patriots. So that's what, July, August, 2 months after Putin offered the S-400, Erdogan purchased the S-400, or committed to buy it, with no technology transfer, nothing, just buying this thing, very consciously designed as a fuck you to the U.S. government. And I think this was really surprising that Erdogan did it. I think he'd done this before. He'd flirted with the Chinese. Well, maybe I'm going to buy a Chinese missile system, and maybe I'm going to buy a Russian missile system. And that's good politics. That's smart. That's pressuring the U.S. That's hitting us where we don't like to be hit. Actually buying a missile system, especially an S-400, people like to point out, well, Greece has the S-300, or not Greece, it's Cyprus, has the S-300, and that's not a problem. The U.S. will sell them weapons. I don't think Cyprus is buying any F-35s. I could be wrong about that. But the S-300 is, it's prior to the sort of networked whatever world of bullshit in which, missiles and planes are thrown at each other now. S-400 has capabilities, is networked in ways that if you actually put an S-400 and an F-35 into the same military, that means that the S-400 learns all the capabilities of an F-35. An F-35 is a fighter jet that doesn't generally work. It doesn't fly very well. But that's not even the most important thing. The most important thing about the F-35 is all the crazy proprietary stealth technologies and network protections and this, that, and the other thing the F-35 has. That's what matters about the F-35. If the F-35 has any value, its value is in the special technologies and whatnot. If you actually have an F-35 regularly flying over an S-400, the S-400 is going to learn those secrets of the F-35, and that would make the F-35 even more worthless than it already is. So yeah, just that craziness of the fact that literally in a 2-month turnaround, Erdogan went from maybe we'll buy the S-400 to we're buying the S-400. And actually, if you look at the timeline, the offer in July 2017, the purchase in September 2017, this is a direct result of the timeline of U.S. involvement in Syria. I said in November 2015, Obama did put in special forces, started, but this was something that was argued over really vehemently between Turkey and the U.S. the entire way. Every step of escalation of U.S. support for the SDF, the sort of the Rojava, the PKK affiliated Kurds in Syria, every step was combated massively against, by the Turkish. In March 2017, that's the point at which Trump sent in the Marines. That's the point at which U.S. support for the PKK-affiliated Kurds in Syria went to the next level, became super official. March 2017, they did that. July 2017, the S-400 came up. And by September 2017, after it was clear for 6 months, for 6 months that the U.S. wasn't going to back off on its support for the Kurds, Erdogan did the thing, and purchased the S-400, which was really dumb because as I think I've said over and over, it gets at something much more profound, much more fundamental, something that is as fundamental to U.S. interest in the region as the Turkish interest in not providing support to the PKK. So yeah, bad idea. Just some really vague. So I know a lot of folks have asked me to talk about Sedat Peker. Did I pronounce that appropriately? Who is a Turkish hyper-nationalist political figure and also a mafioso, is my understanding, a quite open criminal. An aspect of which, honestly, because it wasn't the main aspect of Turkish politics while I've been there, I've never really fully understood the interactions of organized crime and the Turkish government. There have been a series of scandals, I think mostly sort of late 20th century, sort of seen as prior to the AK Party, though it's now being revealed that no, actually the AK Party has the same problems. Organized crime was a much bigger factor in Turkish politics. I think there's a famous scandal, is it from the 90s or the aughts, where I think it's from the 90s, when there was a car crash. And in that car crash, there was 3 dead figures that were found. One of them was a highly placed military figure. The other one was a highly placed organized crime figure. And this is also goes to Cold War politics as well, where, Turkey had, there's probably U.S. intelligence elements to this as well, sort of Gladio type shit. It's all very complicated. It's all incredibly murky. And I think one of the fundamental promises of the AK Party was we're better than that, and we've moved beyond that era of Turkish politics. Though, of course, the degree to which they could have done that is, was always something you had to be unsure of. Well, in recent months, this guy Sedat Peker, who was an organized crime figure, was a hyper-nationalist politician, I think affiliated with the MHP. Don't quote me on that. And was a Erdogan enforcer, was famous after 2015 for making nasty comments about Erdogan enemies and organizing rallies for Erdogan. Has now become, for some reason, some kind of dissident, is apparently living in the UAE, putting together extraordinarily compelling YouTube messages about corruption within the AK party and within the Turkish government, and he's making all kinds of allegations. Some of them seem very credible. Some of them seem like old news. Some of them seem they're so crazy they almost seem like they must be made up. And the consensus is that it's really shaking Erdogan's government. I don't know, man. Like, I feel like we've been here before. Specifically, I think it was the fall of 2013. Was it 12? No, I think it was 13 when a series of actual recordings of Erdogan's family members and government folks engaging in outright corruption, theft, insane stuff were divulged. And that was supposed to take him down. I mean, Erdogan's like the freaking Energizer Bunny. It's I'm real leery of predictions of his fall. He's a genius politician. He's tremendously powerful. That said, I think that this is an indication of his decay. I think that from 2002, I think the AK Party came to power in 2002. Erdogan, because he had been jailed, I think unfairly or legally, but I think for reading a poem about Islam, sort of a indication that Turkey was a fucked up place before Erdogan. So because Erdogan was recently out of jail, he couldn't become prime minister, I think, until 2004. But from sort of 2002 to 2013, sort of Gezi protests, he was a largely successful, and I think it was just this tremendous upswing. I mean, I ran a video on Tunisia last week talking about how important economic growth was, and for that first 12 years, man, like Turkey had that economic growth. The pie was getting bigger. Things were tremendously successful. Erdogan was widely feted in Europe and the United States. He was the answer for how Islam was going to move forward. Everything was awesome. And then things started really falling apart. I think in 2013 was sort of the year with the Gezi protests, which I was there for. I got tear gassed a lot for. He sort of fell out of the affections of Europe and the United States. Obviously, the refugee crisis, which Turkey and the United States had sparked by destroying Syria, did not help his reputation in Europe or the world. Ongoing lack of interest in helping the United States crush one of their former proxies, the Islamic State, didn't help. And it's really interesting because since 2013, you can really see with Erdogan's path this sort of like, and then, and it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. In 2013 and after, he lost so much of his support, both, old school, in the Turkish public more broadly, that in 2015, he had to ally with the nationalists. And what's interesting is, as you look at Turkey, as you look at Erdogan's trajectory, you can see his old allies falling off. Part of what made the AK Party such a powerful, positive influence is that it was a force in the beginning, and it wasn't just Erdogan. Erdogan was always the leader, but there were also a range of committed technocrats who had their own profiles, their own sets of power, their own pluses and minuses, but it was a force that changed Turkey. I would argue for the better. I know I'd piss off a lot of my friends in Turkey saying that, but I think it was a force for good. Those other figures are long gone. Bülent Arınç, was his Gül, Davutoğlu, like all these figures. Many of them, Ali Babacan, many of them have actually started their own political parties at this point. They're long gone. I think it's, if I were in Turkey, I wouldn't want to say this, but it's quite clear that Erdogan's rise to power and the AK Party's rise to power was significantly aided by Gülenists, by the sort of cult of, Fethullah Gülen, a cleric who lives in Pennsylvania. Tremendously significant capture of the Turkish state by sort of religiously affiliated figures. And for that first decade of the AK Party, Gülen and Erdogan worked together. Between 2013 and certainly 2016, when Gulenists tried to do a coup against a straight-out military coup against Erdogan, that fell apart. And it's interesting just watching all of Erdogan's allies fall away from him. All the AK Party folks have fallen away from him. The Gulenists have fallen away from him quite spectacularly. The nationalists that he allied with in 2015, destroying the Kurdish peace process, which had formerly been one of his greatest accomplishments, in 2015, now the nationalists are falling away from him. Meral Akşener has the E-parties, this fascinating figure who's this woman whose nationalist credibility is so high that she can. It's really fascinating political figure who, couldn't possibly be portrayed as pro-Kurdish. She's a nationalist, probably has a nasty history with the Kurds. Couldn't possibly be portrayed as a Gulenist because she's probably been fighting them for decades. So she's like one of the few figures in Turkey who can just get up and just rip Erdogan to shreds all the goddamn time. That's a split off of the nationalists. Sedat Peker is another example of nationalists falling away from Erdogan. I looked at some of the polling. Apparently, the AK Party and the MHP together in recent polls only have about 45% of the electorate. That's not going to do it. And we've got parliamentary elections coming up in 2023. The economy, the Turkish economy is trash. I made videos a couple of years back about how Turkey had this zombie economy that just sort of kept on turning over and kept on even growing in, at least nominally into the period, the post-2013 period. Well, again, thanks to Donald Trump, that crash finally happened. The zombie economy died. And that was before COVID. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who knows a lot about Turkish politics, and it really was brought to me. I'm like, so hey, yeah, man, I feel like I'm out of touch. What's up with Turkish politics? And he said to me, well, he said, Rob, people are dying. That's what's up with Turkish politics. Like, from someone in the United States, we've got vaccines galore, and it seems like, I go to bars now, I go to parties now, I go to places without my mask. I don't have to wear a mask in my building anymore. That is not where the rest of the world is, and that is not where Turkey is. Turkey is still, I was seeing on my Instagram, had serious, no bullshit lockdowns of the kind that the United States never had. Turkey's official figures for COVID deaths and hospitalizations are appalling, and I'm sure the real figures are dramatically worse. People are dying. It's not working out well for Erdogan. The economy is garbage. I think it is a mini victory for Erdogan and, Turkey to some extent that, Joe Biden is willing to meet with him and okay, we're not actually going to tip this over into Saddam Hussein territory. But that ain't enough. It's grim. For so long, looking at the Turkish political scene, it has been my approach and my thought to be like, God, it's just 2023 is so far away. 2023 has been the next parliamentary elections. I can't recall. Was it 2019 where we had the last? No, in 2019 we had the local elections, which are the elections for local administrators, mayors, and whatnot, where the AK Party famously lost power in Ankara, Istanbul, and they never had power in Izmir, did they? But Ankara and Istanbul, which had formerly been really central places for their power, and that was over, and that's a big freaking deal. Erdogan rose to power as the mayor of Istanbul. The mayor of Istanbul is now from an opposition party. But even after that happened, it was still oh God, but the parliamentary elections, which I think were only, I guess there was 2018 parliamentary elections. Is that right? They're only every 5 years? I'm embarrassed. I don't have this. 2023 always seems so far away. That's when the next parliamentary elections were supposed to happen. Well, 2023 doesn't seem so far away now anymore. That seems, I mean, it's just 2 years, which I'm sure can seem like a very long time for a younger person, but for a guy who's 42, it doesn't seem that far away. And it's at this point, it even looks likely that we'll see the end of the Erdogan era in 2023. Of course, he's using the considerable powers he has over media and government to fix the rules of the game. But Turkey is still a place that has real elections. And if those elections were held today, Erdogan would probably lose. Again, Erdogan is a tremendously powerful political figure. He's pulled rabbits out of his hat forever. But I do think he's quite possibly reaching the end of his rope with the United States, especially with this S-400 stuff. The Syrian war seems to be winding down. Who knows? Maybe, Turkey finally gets enough vaccines and has a roaring economic recovery, and a year and a half from now, everyone's like, oh, what are you talking about? Everyone's great again. That seems unlikely to me at this point, but it's possible. But yeah. All right. Well, I think that is my whole shtick. That was my Turkey update. That's what I had to say, what I have to say about that. That's what I have to say about U.S.-Turkish relations. Do we have any questions? I will start answering questions. I am more likely to answer the questions if they come with a super chat, of course. Big fan of that. Abdullah K asks, what's the deal with Turkey safeguarding Kabul's airport? Well, you know what? That's a great freaking question, Abdullah K. And I meant to research that this morning, and I did not, which is unfortunate. Well, that's certainly an interesting thing. Certainly an even more transparent version of Turkey doing sort of U.S. bidding. I don't know enough about the details. It is kind of interesting. Is there an idea that with Muslim soldiers, they'd somehow be more acceptable to the Afghan public? I don't know, man. I don't know. I think it's obviously a bad deal. Turkey, as I pointed out in the past, had this history of, for quite a long time, of being not aggressive. Military was tremendously important. Military is a very big deal for Turkey for the entire period of the Republic. Ataturk was a general who's successful. But it was not aggressive. I think that the founding generations of the Turkish Republic were really burned by the fact that they had to, that the Ottoman Empire had fallen apart so spectacularly. It's important to remember just how quick this was. I mean, at the outset of World War I, 5 years before World War I, Turkey still controlled big swaths of the Balkans, and nominally Egypt, and all the way out to Libya, and that fell apart very quickly and extraordinarily painfully for the Turkish people. So I think for almost the first century, for the first 90 years of the Turkish Republic, there was an extraordinarily strong bias against military adventuring. Yes, have a strong military, have that strong military, but for the love of God, don't throw it away in World War II. Don't throw it away in Iraq in 2003. That was a huge deal in Turkish politics, was not participating in the U.S. war in Iraq in 2003. Erdogan has changed that. We've got Turkish military on the ground in force and taking casualties in Syria. We've got Turkish, at least military advisors, and a lot of Turkish-funded mercenaries in Libya. We've got Turkish advisors in Azerbaijan, and to actually have Turkish troops safeguarding the, that's a lot. That's a lot, and I don't think it's so smart. I think that the Turkish people had the right, and Turkish governments had the right instinct in not getting involved abroad and sort of positioning itself as more of an anti-imperial force than an imperial force. But I don't know. I don't think it's great. I have not looked into the details of the Turkish garrisoning of Afghan airports, but that is sort of my general thought on that topic. We have a super chat. Is China 10,000 years ahead of the U.S.? Name required asks. That's a interesting question that I don't really know how to answer. It's actually kind of fascinating because I think it's common to look at China and the U.S. is very different on their timescales. Sort of China is it's completely different. The United States, it's all about people who came here and agreed to live under the same charter, whereas China is about this thousands of years old civilization, and they are really invested in this, more and more invested in this idea that it's culturally uniform and we're all this sort of walking in lockstep Han Chinese thing, which is, of course, not true. It's reading a lot, actually, about sort of differences. Read this great book called The Escape from Rome that talks about a lot of things, but it's sort of nominally a book about Rome, but one that actually ends up talking about China a great deal and points out how sort of Rome and China were quite similar entities back around the time that both Rome and China existed. They're both empires that sort of tried, that forced peoples together. What China is what, you could imagine if Rome never really fell. Of course, China had points where it was in pieces or disarray or warring states periods, this, that, and the other thing, but it always sort of ended up consolidating back together. And I think it's common for a lot of Chinese advocates to position the country as sort of an anti-imperial force. It's like, no, it's just, China's just the oldest empire. So I think in that, whereas the United States really only consolidated, the mass of the continental United States in the, the switch from territory to states in like the 19 teens, whereas, aspects of China, and there's, I get in trouble sometimes talking about how Xinjiang wasn't really a consolidated part of China before the 1700s either. But that can get controversial, and I may be wrong when I say that, actually. I think I wouldn't say 10,000 years ahead of the U.S., but I'd say, as terms of a consolidated empire, I would say that China is thousands of years ahead of the United States. But is that necessarily a good thing? There's certainly aspects of China's sort of long status that might bring stagnation that the United States lacks. Chiefly the fact that the United States, at least up until the Trump administration, seemed to be a place that could always accept immigrants. That's the main source of U.S. power and the main reason to be optimistic about the United States and a competition between China and the United States. But is that fading? Who knows? Do you know U.S. black projects? I'm sorry, name required. Usually when somebody does a super chat, I want to give a longer, more involved commentary, but I do not know U.S. black projects. I'm not sure what you're talking about. I think, are you talking about just what the U.S. intelligence community, U.S. doing nasty shit, the CIA, the NSA? There's all manner of nasty things happening, but the idea of like a distinct class of U.S. black projects, like, I'm not sure what you're talking about, name required. Maybe if you can say something in the comments, I will. If you could clarify, if you could expand on your question, name required, then I will. I'll try to answer that better. Okay, Alan, thank you. 999. Wow, thank you for that super chat. What do you think is behind Turkey and Egypt rapprochement, and what does it mean for Haftar? Has Libya and Turkey come between Egypt and UAE with Libya's new deals with Egypt? Thanks for the content. I think that Turkey and Egypt have been in have had real problems ever since the current Egyptian government came to power in 2013. In 2012, and this is because Turkey sort of got ahead of its skis everywhere when it came to got a little far over its skis. Is that an analogy that means anything to anybody? I mean, if you lean too far on your skis, you're going to fall over. Erdogan specifically really championed the Arab Spring in its very early years. And in 2012, a Muslim Brotherhood figure was, I think, the first democratically elected leader of Egypt in thousands of years, in Egypt's thousands of years as an entity. That could be an overstatement. Maybe that's Said Zalgul erasure or whatever. And Turkey is seen as affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. They are affiliated with the general idea of, Muslim countries being able to do democracy. So when Mohamed Morsi, the Egyptian president, was overthrown by the current Egyptian dictator, Sisi, who massacred, I think, 1,000, or was it 800 or 1,000 of Morsi's supporters in a single day when he came to power, Erdogan objected to that really, really fucking strongly, and has continued to object to that. I think at this point, we're now 8 years out from Sisi's taking over. And I think perhaps Erdogan was thinking, well, okay, maybe there'll be some kind of restoration. Maybe I can look like the good guy. I think Morsi died in prison, really fucked up. Egypt's first democratically elected president, certainly of the century, maybe of all the centuries, died in prison. And I think the sort of Saudi UAE counter-revolution that Turkey had sort of positioned itself against has, I think is largely seen to have won. So Turkey is Turkey has managed to really alienate the U.S. and Europe. And while the Syrian war was raging and refugees were at the borders, it was really important for, Erdogan could kind of hold the refugees over Europe and the United States, and the U.S. was less worried about the refugees than in collaborating against Assad. U.S. and Europe aren't that interested in that anymore. So I think Erdogan's shtick is kind of wearing thin. And it's pretty clear that the Egyptian government isn't going anywhere. So I think that, it's just sort of like the Egyptian government has survived long enough where Turkey has geopolitical interests in Libya. It has interests in Africa. It has interests all over. It turns out that Sisi isn't just some usurper who's going to fade away or do a Shah of Iran pretty quickly. I still believe that Sisi's government is doomed to fail, but we're closing in on 10 years. And what if it takes another 10 years? Is Turkey going to continue to have a vendetta against the government of 100 million Sunni Arabs? Doesn't make a lot of sense. I think it's mostly the Turkish government acknowledging that the Sisi government is probably there to stay. I think it is positive that both seem to be willing to collaborate on Libya. I think I've mocked Egypt's role in Libya a bit. I think Libya, wants to pretend it's on the level of Russia and Turkey there, and it's really not. I had seen Egypt as a sort of second fiddle to the UAE, or sort of the cannon fodder for the UAE and Saudi Arabia in their manipulation of the Libyan war. So I think it's actually kind of a smart independence move for the Libyans to for the Egyptians to actually branch out to Turkey a little bit, and it also helps them build goodwill. Sisi is another dictator, or populist strongman, sort of on the Netanyahu-Erdogan mold, though obviously, as Netanyahu and Erdogan are completely different from each other. Sisi is also completely different, but he was also sort of caught up in sort of the Trump matrix, where Trump liked strongmen. And Sisi actually, I think, because he's so pro-Israel, has a lot of support beyond just the Trump and the Republicans in the United States. But he's also a guy who came to power murdering 1,000 peaceful protesters the week he came to power. So he's conscious that there's now a U.S. presidential administration who might be a little more interested in human rights and at least pretending that the U.S. is about stability. So I think that Sisi, for Egypt, branching out to Turkey and working with Turkey to stabilize Libya, it helps Erdogan in that way as well. It helps Turkey as well to look more responsible, more positive. I think I've answered that. Thank you, Alan. That's a very generous super chat. Brando Commando, do you think Turkey will step in if Egypt and or Saudi Arabia collapse? Or would they leave it up to another power like the U.S., Russia, or France? Brando Commando, that is a fascinating question and an extraordinarily grim one. I don't think we've quite internalized. I think everyone just sort of, I think broadly across geopolitics, YouTube, think tanks, I think a lot of people just sort of assume in this sort of dark sadness, like, God, like Egypt is a country that is very close to collapse. I talk about how Saudi Arabia's governing model is finished. Like, yeah, Saudi Arabia is finished, as the Saudi royal family's playpen. It's already changed dramatically since I ran those first videos. But it's possible to imagine a situation in which Saudi Arabia evolves peacefully. Because really, if you cut out the Saudi royal family parasite, Saudi Arabia is actually a country that still has, even in the context of dramatically less petrochemicals being consumed, Saudi Arabia is going to be the last country pumping oil. So without the Saudi royal family sucking up all the money, then actually 40 million Saudis can't live for free the way they have, but they could, it's imaginable that it could kind of work out. Egypt, it's hard to imagine how that works out. If we get even a little bit of the climate change effects that we're all supposed to expect now, there's so many failure cases for Egypt, and that's 100 million fucking people. It's not like Syria. Syria is 20 million people. And if the delicate systems that Egypt relies on fall apart into some kind of chaos, that's nightmare time. And would Turkey jump in? I think if it could, it would. I haven't really thought about this. That's an excellent question, Brando Commando. I mean, sometimes I have the least to say when the best questions are asked. I think a lot depends on what kind of shape Turkey is in when that happens. Turkey, and it's so much of Turkey's problems at this point are sort of self-imposed by Erdogan's sort of latter strongman idiot phase. So much of Turkey's incredible bounty and capability is being sacrificed to Erdogan's ego at this point. So I could imagine 5-10 years from now, yes, at this point in a post-Erdogan future where, Turkey's actually doing all right. The collapse in oil prices is great for Turkey. I don't know that the climate change effects are too nasty to Turkey. Maybe Turkey's in the position where they are the power who could step in and try to do something for Egypt. But I think it's also going to be just a horrific problem. How many people does Turkey feed and house in northern Syria at this point? I don't know, 5 million people maybe. So they're going to jump in and try and figure out how Egypt's going to be handled. So yeah, man, I got to start thinking a little more seriously about Egyptian collapse, I think. But that's a fantastic question, Brandon Commander. Thank you. Name Required says, does the U.S. have the most advanced tech in the galaxy? Well, I certainly doubt it. We're talking about aliens. I think that it's interesting because there's a lot of talk about UFOs in the United States recently, and I think it's quite straightforwardly Pentagon attempting to scare people and justify more of its defense spending. Terrorism seems to be dying out. This whole China thing, hasn't gotten people as excited as we wanted to. Let's get them scared of aliens. But to the more broader question, name required, like, are we talking about, like, do I think aliens are possible? Yeah, of course. And even within the Milky Way galaxy, it's entirely possible that there are aliens observing everything we do and just sort of laughing at us. It's also entirely possible that there have been many alien civilizations within the Milky Way galaxy that have all killed themselves because of, problems like nuclear weapons or I don't know, the internet that has driven them all insane and have them kill themselves. I think that I'm somebody who thinks that the math is there, that, it is arrogant to assume that we are the only ones who have life on this planet, but also I think it's a little ridiculous to assume that the Pentagon, doesn't understand some shit that it sees. So aliens are here. I don't believe that either. I hope that made sense. Name required. Ati Rantamaki. Is that Finnish? Here you go, big boy. Do you think U.S. policy in the Middle East will change now that Biden is POTUS? U.S. troops in Syria, Houthis getting deleted. I think that getting out of Afghanistan is great. I think that honestly, the Biden administration is kind of looking for marginal stuff, has been doing a lot of marginal stuff that's important. I think it was very good that they took Houthis off the foreign terrorist organization list. Supposedly they want to end the Iraq authorization for the use of military force, which is, not touching the big one, the 2001 authorization for the use of military force, but is a good little bit of paperwork. I think that in the broad scheme of things, the U.S. wants to get out of the Middle East. But I think there's so many actors who are working so hard to keep that from happening. I just don't know that the Biden administration is equal to the task. I said at the beginning of the Biden administration, all I expected and wanted, look, my highest expectations and hopes for the Biden administration was that it would my highest hope for the Biden administration was that we would get out of Yemen and that the Iran nuclear deal would get back. The Biden administration has said it wants to do both of these things. It is finding it difficult to do so. I am very angry at the Biden administration for not doing these things, which are straightforwardly easy in terms of exertions of U.S. power. I do understand that they are tremendously politically difficult. And if we get to the end of the Biden administration with a functioning Iran nuclear deal and the end of U.S. involvement in Yemen, then I will consider the Biden administration an amazing success. I said that at the beginning. I've already been supposedly, we'll see what it actually means in practice, but supposedly the U.S. is out of Afghanistan, which I did not expect, honestly. So that could, in theory, be a positive. Of course, with all of these transitions, all of these moves, they are messy, they are complicated. Who knows, if some charismatic U.S. journalist gets killed in Afghanistan and there's a videotape of it, will they be able to justify a massive return of U.S. troops to Afghanistan? So it's a really complicated question. I don't know. What is better under Biden than it is under Trump is that we can actually trust and believe that when the Biden administration says it's going to do something, it's going to do something, Biden administration has said it's getting out of Afghanistan. Is it really? Well, it's debatable. The troops are out, are actually probably going to leave. That's good. That's big. Not having U.S. troops in Afghanistan means there is less of a chance for telegenic deaths of U.S. troops in Afghanistan that drive more commitment to Afghanistan. We're going to keep bombing there, but at least something's fucking happening. Donald Trump talked a huge game about getting us out of all these wars and did nothing but pour us in further, just more and more and more and more and more. Like I said at the beginning of this presentation, he was the big anti-U.S. and Syria guy. He's the guy who put boots on the ground, official non-special forces boots on the ground in Syria for the first time. So, I think it's better to have somebody who's actually capable of doing things. That is an improvement. He needs to be politically forced to do these things, but it's nice that he's there. Thank you. I hope that was a good. Houthis getting deleted. I hope that was a good answer. On the Houthis won the war. There was a great, I think, Foreign Exchanges podcast and foreign policy article on this recently. Like, the Houthis won and won the war in Yemen. And I think what Biden is trying to do is the delicate work of getting Saudi Arabia out of Yemen on terms that are somewhat that aren't that embarrassing for the Saudis, and also at the same time doing the Iran nuclear deal. It's complex. It's a bunch of things going on. I would like them to do more. Anyway, Matt Elman says, love your channel. Well, thank you. Go buy a lamb shawarma from Mamoons in the Village. You deserve it. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate that, Matt. Thanks. That's very generous super chat. Let me know if you have any questions. That's very cool. Richard Baker asks, there's a YouTuber called Kraut who has made some videos that remind me of your work. He made a great series on Turkey. Have you seen it? I have tried to watch Kraut's China video like a dozen times. It's an hour long, man. All his videos are an hour long. That's my main point about Kraut. I think he says some great things. I think he says some things in the one China video that I've watched that were very wrong, just like basic factual errors. But I'm sure I make basic factual errors all the time. Yeah, I wish I could say more about Kraut, but I just haven't. I haven't been able to bring myself to watch hour-long videos. Which is a bit ironic because I produce a 2-hour-long video. I'm very grateful to all of you for being here. Matt Ullman says, I could see Iran stepping in if Saudi Arabia collapses. I could see Iran stepping in very lightly out in the east if Saudi Arabia collapsed, but that would be exclusively in the Shia areas, which of course are where a lot of the oil production is. But it depends on that. I think that scenario depends on the U.S. being sort of out of what's the word I'm looking for? Just like being way further out of the Middle East than I could ever contemplate them being. And I think, Iraq isn't necessarily, I think Iraq has been forced to be pro-Iran by certain insane actions by Donald Trump, the Soleimani assassination, for example. But I think like the people who are running Iraq at this point are not necessarily big fans of Iran. And for Iran to get to and take over, aspects of Saudi Arabia, like I think the Iraqis might have something to say about that. I think wouldn't it be more natural for the Shia elements of Iraq to try to annex the Shia elements of Saudi Arabia? I don't know. Excellent questions. Brother Man Bill says, pee pee poo poo. Okay. Thank you, Matt Elman. That is a tremendously generous super chat. I'm very grateful. A lamb shawarma from Mamoons in the Village. I'll think about that. I am still in New York. Yes, I am a New Yorker. I live up here in Harlem, which is fun. See. Let's see. New York. Where are we? There was another super chat, wasn't there? Oh, 2 more super chats. My God. What happened to Haftar and will Wagner leave as true realist? These are 2 very good questions about Libya. I've made a video. I think it called it Libya's Curse, Khalifa Haftar. Khalifa Haftar is a strongman who basically a guy who actually helped Gaddafi rise to power, was there back in the 60s. This is a guy who's pushing 80, Haftar at this point, or he's in his mid to late 70s. Fell out with Gaddafi in the 80s. I think he lost a war for Gaddafi in Chad. Eventually ended up living in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. as a CIA agent. I don't know if it's fair or not to call him still a CIA agent today. Who knows? But since at least 2014, Haftar has wanted to set himself up as a strongman in Libya, incredibly key in the very fragile peace in Libya, tipping over into full-blown civil war in 2014, set up a Libyan national army, nominally answerable to the House of Representatives government in Tobruk, or is it no longer in Tobruk? But my understanding is that his factions would occasionally disappear members of the House of Representatives legislative body. In 2019, his forces rolled across the country in an attempt to conquer Tripoli, one of those confusing map things where it looks like Haftar controls the whole country, but most of what he controls is desert. Majority of Libyan population had always lived on the coast in the west of the country. Very exciting thing that happened in, I believe, the spring of 2020 is that his offensive failed. His offensive, to True Realist's question, was supported by an embarrassingly large scope of countries: the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, France, Russia, and Donald fucking Trump, despite the fact that the official position of the U.S. government at the time, and still, is support for the official UN sponsored government, which has now dissolved itself, but was at the time in Tripoli in favor of a new UN-sponsored government. So a lot has happened. Haftar's offensive was defeated in 2020, and in some part due to discussions between Turkey and Egypt. Turkey supporting the UN-supported official government that had always controlled Tripoli, the capital. There is now a new prime minister. The UN-supported government has dissolved itself in the name of another UN-supported government that is also nominally supported by the House of Representatives government of Egypt. Libya is supposedly unified. But Haftar is still there. Haftar and his family and his collection of militias still exist. There's still this Libya National Army floating around in the southeast. What does it mean? Who knows? Is Libyan democracy always in danger as long as Haftar is in Libya? Yes, absolutely. I've been surprised by the extent to which Haftar has been sidelined. I think it's because Haftar has always been a creature of his foreign supporters, and he had managed to even piss off his foreign supporters by failing to take the whole country. And also, I think by, frankly, just being impolite to them. He's a guy who's very dependent on foreign support and spent a lot of time ignoring and dismissing that foreign support. So, yeah, I think he's sort of richly deserved, has left himself isolated. But yet, he's still there, still potentially a problem. I do not know what the status of the Russian Wagner mercenaries are, if there's still a big factor there. I mean, there's not much for them to do at this point. It's possible that they are not being withdrawn in an attempt to negotiate to get Turkish-funded mercenaries withdrawn. Don't know what the exact status of that is, True Realist. Alan asks, would a stable Libya with its assets unfrozen and planned larger oil output join the Turkish sphere or make a North African sphere with its neighbors, as per recent large trade agreements, deals, and aid? I would say both. You can do both. You know, like if there's not an active war zone, there doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to be opposed. Those two things don't need to be opposed. It is one of the most hopeful possibilities of this year. Perhaps I'm overly pessimistic. I think it's entirely likely that it'll fall to shreds. But the fact that after 10 years, Libya seems to be unified under a single government, seems to be, I guess really just after 7 years, I don't know, seems to be moving forward is phenomenal. It is something that Tunisians are optimistic about. It is something that Algerians can be optimistic about. The idea of Libya, even in the context of lower oil prices, just the idea of a Libya that is unified and at peace isn't just great for that whole North African rim. It is fantastic for all of North Africa, for the whole Sahel region. I did a video last month talking about how the disintegration of how the NATO destruction of Libya in 2011 had all these horrific knock-on effects for the entire Sahel region, for all of North Africa. It would be fantastic if it got together. And I think that there are sort of natural affinities between Turkey, and this gets to sort of like the Turkish sort of Muslim Brotherhood affinity. The most powerful political party in Tunisia's decade-long functioning real representative democracy is Ennahda, which is a also a sort of Muslim Brotherhood affiliated thing. There are aspects in the Libyan government that are Muslim Brotherhood affiliated. Turkey is traditionally friendly to that. There are elements in the Moroccan government that are Muslim Brotherhood affiliated. And has the Algerian election happened yet? There's probably going to be a lot of the Iraq protesters are vetoing the election, but there's a lot of Islamist Muslim Brotherhood types who are running for election, might end up in the government. So it's entirely possible to have for a lot of people, Muslim Brotherhood is this scary, oh no thing. It's a scary, oh no thing, because really scary, oh no elements in the Gulf, actual medieval kings want to get people scared of the idea of Muslim democracy. Like saying Muslim Brotherhood affiliated is essentially saying all the European governments are governed by Enlightenment affiliated political parties and it's a conspiracy. It is an intellectual movement that is a century old at this point and means very different things in very different places. There have been periods when certain aspects of the Muslim Brotherhood have been violent. Algeria in the 90s is the most extreme version of that. In recent decades, I think most chiefly by emblematic in Tunisia, where they've actually had a successful democracy, Muslim Brotherhood affiliated or Muslim Brotherhood descended political groups have sort of shown themselves to be the most responsible pro-democracy actors on the stage. I think that there is arena, Alan, for Libya to both be affiliated with Turkey in some ways and to be affiliated with a strengthening North African Arab Amazigh bloc. And that would be freaking great. Anyway, that's, it's a very hopeful development and I hope it works out. Okay. Are Turks scared about the massive growth of their Kurdish minority? Yes. Yeah, I think that you can always get votes from Turks by scaremongering about Kurds, but I don't know, man. I think that there are a lot of the Kurdish Turk, the ethnic difference between Kurds and Turks is, I talk about a Turkish girlfriend I had who was, when the PKK did a bombing, she was vehemently Turkish. And when the Turkish government did a bit of oppression or a massacre, she was vehemently Kurdish. I think that was one of the great victories of of Erdogan, in fact. In the early years of the first decade of his time in power, was he really succeeded in making the Kurdish issue a lot less of an issue. And it's only after 2015 when he lost an election and then reran an election affiliated with the nationalists that he blew up that Kurdish peace process. So I think there's a real chance of them getting together in more, what was I saying? Of the Kurdish Turkish issue sort of dissolving. That'd be nice. Might have happened already if it weren't for the Syrian civil war. It's never going to go away entirely. These things go, look at the Scottish in the UK. These things go in waves, but I would think that the Turkish Kurdish cleavage could decline in salience going forward to get excessively political sciencey about it. Turkey has been involving itself via the Muslim Brotherhood in Tunisia. Some say they've been successful. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, how successful? Because I think Erdogan famously, or not Erdogan, maybe it was one of his ministers, famously went to Tunisia to be like, hey, come help me fix Libya. And Kais Saied, the Tunisian president, was like, hey, fuck off. So, yeah, I mean, it varies. It's hard to say. Yeah, and I think this compulsion to demonize and make the Muslim Brotherhood like this evil thing, like the Muslim Brotherhood is the vanguard of the idea that Islam and democracy is compatible. There are elements of the Muslim Brotherhood who disagreed with that at certain periods, but there are more elements today who believe that they are compatible. And I would argue in Tunisia, conceivably in some other countries, they've been proving that they are compatible. And the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, desperately want to prove that that's not true and that they are not compatible. So that's why they have successfully made Muslim Brotherhood a scary buzzword in the United States and Europe too as well. It's not necessarily a scary buzzword. It's kind of natural the United States participates and interferes in the politics of all European states. It's never described that way, but it's what we do. So I don't think it's necessarily so sinister that Turkey, a Sunni state, Sunni Muslim state that does democracy, has influence and attempts to influence other Sunni Muslim states that are attempting to do democracy. There's a new super chat. Alan, thank you. You're very generous today. Would Turkey's foreign policy outlive Erdogan? What shape might the region take without AKP? To bring into light, Libya was the only country that voted for secular parties right after the Arab Spring. Oh, interesting. Huh. Did not really think about that aspect of Libya voting for secular parties. So that was the government of the... It's a lot of Libyan history to remember for a very small country. Would Turkey's foreign policy outlive? It depends what aspects of Turkish foreign policy we're talking about. I think, interestingly, the biggest commitment that Turkey has made is, I think, possibly, hopefully, one of the lightest, hopefully the most Erdogan related, the extreme overcommitment to Syria. I mean, Turkey has essentially conquered big slices of northern Syria. Has it been in some parts of northern Syria for 5 fucking years now? And there's little indication of them leaving. I think that's an Erdogan motivated policy. I think that any Turkish government would always be committed to bombing the shit out of any attempt to create an independent Rojava. I think a post-Erdogan government might be a little more open to dealings with Assad, might be a little more open to certainly not dealing with the Kurds, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe every Turkish government will want to maintain a Syrian protectorate going forward, and it'll become sort of like a Golan Heights situation. That's depressing. But certain things like the Eastern Mediterranean thing, like Turkey's aggressiveness around Cyprus and gas exploration, that is 100% Turkish foreign policy, guaranteed going forward. You're never going to find a Turkish government who isn't pissed off about the fact that Greece controls all of the islands, that you can see from the Turkish coastline. And I think it's in Greece's interest to negotiate some kind of allowance that's a little more. I mean, Turkey is the most powerful country in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's the second biggest military in NATO. It's a real big deal, and it's fucking ridiculous that it can't explore for gas. True, some of the problems that it has related to that are related to Erdogan's dumb and aggressive politics. A more conciliatory figure would be more likely to get to a better settlement. But more broadly speaking, you're not going to have a Turkish government that's going to be like, oh, sure, let's accept the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and we're fine not having any territorial waters at all. Like that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. You're not going to find a Turkish government that's going to be, I think, less interested in pro-Azerbaijan stuff. I mean, I think that's sort of like, oh, we are Turkish brothers across the stands. I mean, that goes back to Ataturk. If not before. I don't think you're going to find a Turkish government that's super friendly to Israel. You're going to find certainly Turkish governments that are probably going to be less loud about opposition to Israel, but you're not going to find a friendly one. There are, I think, as far as like the general priorities of Turkish foreign policy, I don't think they're necessarily going to switch. I think they're going to be hopefully a little less aggressive and hopefully a little bit better put. I mean, perhaps that'd actually be a very, very wise sort of good cop, bad cop move for Turkey to make. They've had Erdogan for 20 years, and he's been very aggressive, and didn't he call Merkel a Nazi at one point? I mean, it's just comical when you list all the things that Erdogan has done. It might make sense to have like a more collegial, friendly good cop now making the exact same arguments, but in a much more pleasant way. That might be the next right step for Turkey. But I think to answer your question, I don't think you're going to see massive changes in Turkey's position. But man, if they really are going to be garrisoning Afghan airports, I can't think of a dumber fucking thing for Turkey to do. But yeah, I don't think like the JHP is going to be as committed to or even the MHP really are going to be the Nationalist Party or the E Party, which is sort of like the friendlier Nationalist Party, are going to be as committed to the U.S. Turkey attempting to be like the U.S. empire. Like, I don't think that's likely to happen. Malta Meyer says Greece's 5-year bond yield turned negative. What the fuck is going on, man? I don't know, man. Greece. So their bond yield turned negative. Is that good? Bonds. It always takes me so long to understand. Like with bonds and yields, it always takes me a while to figure out what's going on. I don't understand money. Matt Elman says it must be payday today. There are a lot of super chats. Yes, I'm very grateful. Folks are being very generous. Let me answer some non-super chat questions. Yeah, I don't know what's going on in Greece. Germany is clearly run by whoever won World War II. Multiplier negative yield means that people pay to hold. That's something normally. Yeah, that's okay. So, okay. Yeah, Multimeyer says negative yield for Greece means that people pay to hold on to the debt. That's something that normally only happens to Germany and the Swiss. So that's kind of insane. But it's not like negative nominal, which I think like the Germans and Swiss have actually said like on their face, like, you give us money, we'll give you less back. But in real terms, you are losing money to own Greek debt, which doesn't make any sense because Greece debt should be incredibly risky. This sort of debt to GDP for Greece, I think, is at like 200%. But I guess people just assume that Greece is a member of the EU and will not be allowed to fail, and is just going to keep going forward with their absurd, absolutely unpaybackable debt. But it will continue to be paid back. I think that's an important distinction. It's not like the amount of debt that this country holds can ever be paid back all at once, but it'll never be asked to be paid back all at once. Certain tranches of debt will come due every year and will be replaced with more debt. And if the yields are negative, if they actually don't have to pay a really high rate of interest to continue borrowing money, then they can just continue borrowing money. And it's kind of crazy that's sort of how the Greek financial crisis is going to end. I've got a video hopefully coming up later this week talking about just how crazy economics have become. All right, let's see. There's another super chat. I think we're coming to the point where I'm going to answer these. Oh, what happened? Wait, no, what happened? Sorry. Can't quite. There we go. Another super chat. Thank you, Alan. Wow. In all the elections held in Libya, 2012 and 2014, the Muslim Brotherhood lost and the seculars won. Betting on political Islam could be bad for Turkey. Well, it sounds like there's not much to worry about with political Islam in Turkey. But then Alan, so I thought Haftar's whole pitch was that he was anti-Islamist. So how did they justify that? Well, you've been very generous, Alan. I don't want to get bogged down in Libyan politics. Happy to hear that secularism is alive and well in Libya. Hello, guys. Hello from Turkey. Will Iran get involved in Afghanistan when the U.S. leaves? I think Iran has always been involved in Afghanistan. But what's interesting is that Iran has always been anti-Taliban, which I think I ran a video recently talking about how actually the reason that the United States won so quickly in Afghanistan in the fall of 2001 and seems to be losing ever since is because we were allied with the Iranians in the fall of 2001. And then in January 2002, George W. Bush gave the Axis of Evil speech and the Iranians stopped helping us. But yeah, Iran has always been involved in Afghanistan and has always been opposed to the Taliban. Erdogan will win the elections in 2023, not legally, not without. I don't know. I don't think that's very likely. Anyway, I'm going to start spieling. I am so grateful that folks have come. I will answer more questions if they come in the form of super chats, but we are rounding the 2-hour mark. I am so grateful that you all are here. Logo, I'll answer a local question. More Freedom Foundation, with all the Republican interference and voter counting after Trump's idiot coup, if he tried again in 2024, would he succeed? That is the big question. Are people being alarmist and saying that democracy is in danger in the United States? My usual instinct is to say, yes, they are being alarmist. I think a lot of the voter suppression stuff that the Republicans are doing right now actually has the risk of suppressing the Republican vote. There was historically high levels of voting in the last election, and they weren't. This uptick in voting wasn't that bad for the Republicans. If they had been running somebody who wasn't Donald King Trump, it might have worked out better. So I don't know. It's not good that people are trying to limit the vote. In the United States. I've never really done a big deep dive on sort of voter fraud issues. Absolutely, a lot of the big claims that Trumpkins make are absolute risible bullshit. But maybe people should have government IDs to prove they are who they are when they go to vote. I don't believe voter fraud is a big dynamic, but some of the requirements that Democrats act as if are like this horrific anti-democratic requirement might not be that bad. I just haven't studied the issue for myself to the extent that I'd be willing to talk about it. My name is Robert Morris. I do videos at this YouTube channel every Tuesday. If you're new, please subscribe. I often do more produced videos. I hope to have a more produced video coming later this week. If you want to keep the conversation going all month long, you can join me at Robbo Law on Twitter. That's Twitter at Robbo Law. I spend a lot of time there. At Robbo Law on Twitter. You can also, I now have a Instagram account for the More Freedom Foundation at More Freedom Foundation. You can follow me there. That'd be cool. I do this big live chat thing once a month. I also do a private chat for the patrons only, for people who sign up on Patreon. Every month we have a patrons only news chat. As you can see from the questions, people want me to talk about a wide variety of things. There's no way I could possibly speak to everything that everybody wants me to talk on this channel. But the patrons only newscast is the one time a month when I try. I generate a list of topics related to a lot of the countries I cover here, other stuff that I want to talk about, and then patrons tell me what they want me to talk about. And the morning before that news chat, I research everything on the list, and then we talk about it. In that, on the patrons only newscast, usually only about 5 to 10 people show up, so I can interact, read every comment. There's real interaction that goes on there that does not go on in this one to the same extent. So please sign up to support me on Patreon. You can also make PayPal donations. Both of those are available on the channel's homepage. I have written books. I have written Fatka and the New Birth of American Empire, which is a sort of a short thing. Newly relevant. I'm going to be talking about cryptocurrency a little bit and sort of the powers that the U.S. government has. And this very boring, very technical book that has actually weirdly been cited in like real works of history. It's kind of flattering. I wrote this, 8 years ago now. This is fun. You should read it. Honestly, I read it now and I barely understand parts of it. It's very technical. This is much more easy reading, fairly short, and it's about the U.S.-Saudi relationship that is at the root of all sort of terrorism issues. It's Everybody's Lying About Islam. You should buy this, available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle form. And then there's this incredible tome that I probably spent too long writing, which is Avoiding the British Empire, which is basically sort of my stealth history of the world, explains really everything about the modern world. I think it's tremendously valuable. It's a good read. And since COVID, when a lot of people were home, some people actually finally started reading it and they liked it. Avoiding the British Empire. So check that out. So those are the books I have written. Anybody got any more super chats? I'll keep talking if there's more super chats, but I think that's most of my spieling. Yeah, and please like, subscribe, comment, all of that. I think a lot of folks have noticed. What's amazing is like I've got this great, amazing group of folks who continue to support the channel, and I think you've made it more financially viable because since a fundraiser, I did last fall. It's amazing. The patrons are amazing. Everybody who shows up and interacts is amazing, but there have been changes to the YouTube algorithm, and we're at this point where like 3 years ago I was putting up videos that got 10,000, 100,000, 800,000 views, one of them, and now I regularly, I'm super excited if I break 10,000 views. It's usually only about 2,000-3,000 views. So YouTube isn't as interested in letting independent media go large anymore. So if you could just do what you can to get that algorithm excited, like, comment, subscribe, tell your friends. If you find one of those videos that I did that you like, just email it to your friends. I don't know. Anyway, I'm tremendously grateful you all are here. Thank you so much for all of those super chats. Feeling very, very grateful. And I think with that, I will say goodbye. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Oh, there's another one, another super chat from Christopher Murtaugh. Here we go. Thanks again, Rob. Come up to Montreal when this COVID thing is over. Beverages on me. Well, thank you, Chris Murtaugh. That's very generous. Come up to Montreal. Well, you don't have a question? I mean, let's see. Well, thank you, Christopher Murtaugh. That is very generous. Well, Matt Ellman was very generous, and he seems to have asked a question. Let's see what he has to say. Matt Ellman, there are biases by his books. I'm poor. Yes, please buy my poor. What are biases? What are my biases? I have tremendous, thanks, Rob and Judd, as always, working, so listening in the background. Didn't get a chance to comment much. Thank you, Christopher Murtaugh. What are biases? My biases? Well, my biases are, I think I'm pretty clear about my biases. I used to be more conservative than I am now. Donald Trump certainly threw me for a loop, but I still consider myself fairly conservative. I'm very against U.S. intervention. Anyway, okay. I think Christopher Murtaugh, you should questions, plenty of questions. Working, no side brain power. Well, does anybody want to ask a last question? I feel like Christopher Murtaugh has done a super chat, and I owe at least another minute or two of talk. Bro Kurds look more like Middle Easterners. They're indigenous to the area. What are your biases, Lowell? What are my biases? There we go. Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate your content. Keep on keeping on. Well, thank you for the, this is very generous super chats. Yeah, Turkey, one of the most fascinating things about Turkey is the incredible range of just the way that people look within Turkey. It's one of the only places that is as it's one of the only places that are as diverse looking as the United States. But what's different was in the United States, we have a really, I think we have an ideology of like, you're all American. Well, the good Americans have an ideology of we're all Americans. It doesn't matter. This is all our country. We have a constitution, not a blood and soil bullshit that we're married to or crazy nationalism. But in Turkey, you can have people who look just as diverse as Americans do, but they're all like fervent Turkish hyper-nationalists. I'll always remember the first, I think I had an internship in a Turkish law firm in 2010, and there were 6 kids in, I think one guy was about my age, in this sort of intern pool. And it was interesting because 2 of them looked very, I guess, stereotypically Arabic. And I think for, a dumb American who doesn't know much, I would say that probably Kurds tend to be more American looking, even though there are plenty of people who identify as Kurdish or are very pale skinned, tend to be more Arabic looking, maybe a little more swarthy. So there were 2 who looked, they could have been Lebanese or they could have been Syrian or something like that. Though interesting, the most fervently hyper-nationalist Turkish nationalist of them was a guy who to me looked kind of Arabic. Not sure how he would react if he heard me say that. To me, as someone who doesn't know anything. Then 2 of them actually looked kind of like the romantic image of Turkish nationalism. They looked kind of Asian. They had there's in the face they looked a little Asian. Like they could have been steppe warriors, in the time of Genghis Khan or what have you. And then 2 of them looked like super European. Like Greek, or even one guy looked like sort of Balkan, maybe Polish, and all of them were very serious Turkish nationalists, which is kind of funny. Wow, that's a lot more super chatting. Name required says Black projects are top secret projects. Yes, there are a lot of top secret projects. Actually, famously, the United States has too many fucking top secret projects. It's a real concern, actually, in Washington, D.C., the abuse of the classified designation. There's something like 1 million. I could be wrong about this, but I think I remember there are something like 1 million people in the United States with some kind of security classification. There are different levels, of course, but are they really, 1 million people doing valuable top secret things for the United States government? And are they really, you could hear that like 1 million people. Oh my OMG, there must be aliens and Roswell and super technologies and blah, blah, blah. But no, like they're usually just doing the same boring bullshit. Producing research reports that are less sophisticated and knowledgeable than this YouTube chat, but smacking a top secret on there. It's sort of something that I think is seen as being somewhat abused and kind of silly. But are there specific Black projects you want me to talk about? Name required. You've been so generous, and I feel like I don't want to be dismissive of what you're saying. I mean, there are, I'm sure there are really nasty, nasty secrets in the U.S. government and about what the U.S. government has done. I'm sure it's done like really horrific things. I think there's a tendency to romanticize that. Like maybe there's horrific things that were so savvy and sinister. Like I think it's probably like horrifically stupid things. Like when the full picture of like how involved the U.S. was in like setting up jihadists in Syria is released, 80 years from now, we're all going to be like, Jesus Christ, that was so stupid and so sad, rather than like, OMG, like, I feel like as more and more classified materials get, I think like, didn't some of the 1953 stuff from Iran, wasn't that recently declassified? And it's just sort of like, well, yeah, we did a coup here. Yippee. Nothing really makes us look smart the way, when you talk about Black projects or super secret projects, they just make us look kind of brutal and dumb and gross. That's my bias. I could be wrong. Who knows? Maybe the CIA really does control everything. So many more super chats. Oh my God. Name required asks, does the U.S. control the fabric of the universe? I would say no. No, it does not. The fabric of the universe. I think what is interesting, to get back to that UFO thing, is like there's so much we don't understand, and also this gets to sort of science and the demonization of what's his name, Fauci, the doctor that I suppose progressives are supposed to love and conservatives are supposed to hate. Like this idea that science is supposed to understand things and control things. Like over long periods of time with long periods of testing, like there are certain scientific concepts and things that make sense and kind of work. They don't work because we understand things entirely. Like we don't entirely understand why planes work. We don't entirely understand why vaccines work. We don't really, I think there's a lot of people who are invested in this idea that, oh yeah, science says, and we understand this. Like we don't understand shit. We just have some things that have kind of worked out. So like people are making big political scandals about things that Fauci or the CDC or the NIH got wrong about COVID, where it's like, yes, this is science. This is like trying to figure stuff out. Like, and then when it comes to the UFO thing, they're like, look, all this stuff that like, see that video camera thing? We don't know what that is. And people are like, it must be aliens. We don't know what it is. When it's actually like, of course we don't know what it is. We don't know what anything is. So yeah, that's I think that's sort of obliquely a comment on the fabric of the universe. Name required. All right, wow, more super chats. Good God, people are being very generous today. Thank you. Brando Commando says, do you think French soft power through their language will curb Chinese influence in developing Africa in the next 50 years? Well, that's a very sophisticated question, Brando Commando. I mean, we got to worry a little more about French hard power. I mean, the French have got at least 5,000 troops across the Sahel at this point, use financial and political levers to control the politics. I think it was pretty, the president of Chad, who was famously killed in battle a month or so back, his son replaced him and had to receive the blessing of the French government before he could solidify his power in government. I think there's real French hard power that has to be dealt with. There was I think it's Derek Davidson of Foreign Exchange. I feel like I'm doing ads for these guys all the time, but I just really like the products they put out. He does this daily update email. I think I gave him like $60 for the year, and I get a daily email that aggregates all the scariest news from the world. It's extraordinarily useful service that they provide, and they do fun podcasts. But I think Derek Davison keeps saying in talking about, former French colonies, like it's like Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave. So I think the French have many more layers than just many more layers than just their what's the word I'm looking for? Many more layers than just their language. But absolutely, I mean, the fact that many African countries speak French as their sort of unifying language is important, and it's going to continue to be important. It's a beautiful language. I don't think. I think that sort of speaks. I think Brando Commando, that speaks to sort of like just a general concept around literacy and just sort of the sort of first mover advantage I've talked about. I did a video years and years ago, it still gets a lot of views, called "Why China Will Never Rule the World," talking about how the British were able to be so much more brutal and sweeping with their impacts on countries than the United States was, even though the United States is like incomparably richer and more powerful than the British were. The other countries in the world have become more durable and more powerful. Those African countries are not going to need to find another language. I think if African countries are going to fall away from French, as Algeria consciously has, actually, Algeria has consciously driven out French influence to the extent where people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s are all fluent in French, and younger generations don't. Some of the younger generations don't speak any French; they just speak Arabic. It's not like any country is going to give up French to transition to Mandarin. They're going to give up French to transition to whatever they've decided their local language or more powerful, local language should be. And it's not going to be Mandarin, because the Mandarin, the Chinese are never going to be able to exert that level of influence, because just certain ideas of nationalism that are spread throughout the world by literacy are just too widespread. China's not going to be able to do that. So yeah, I think what we're talking about there is a French sort of first mover advantage. And then, in a lot of cases, the French were, not the first, because there were prior empires and all of the African countries that had aggregated different polities together, but sort of the French in the modern era that sort of, consolidated these countries as countries, famously in many cases, illogically. So yeah, I think there is that first mover advantage that will keep that Frenchness important. I hope that was helpful. Wow, man, folks are being very generous. Name required. Does China control the fabrics of the universes? No, it does not. So what can I say about China and the fabric of the universe? Like talk about the mandate of heaven or something? I just don't know. What we don't know about, I don't, name required. Thank you for pushing me into these arenas I don't understand at all. I don't know much in the way of particle physics. I don't know much about consciousness. When I think of the fabric of the universe, I just think about the fabric of human consciousness. And when we get into the minutia of particle physics, it's like, that doesn't mean much to me. Are my atoms touching these atoms or what have you? It's what am I interacting with? What is my understanding of what I'm interacting with? How does consciousness, how do things come across the transom? And the extent to which anything can control human consciousness is a very interesting one. There we go. And if we're going into weird tech, which I think you've also asked me a question, like what is China's top tech? Supposedly, China has made some strides with quantum computing and entanglement that supposedly aspects of the United States haven't. I don't know. Maybe that was 2 years ago. Who knows what is actually happening? But if you sort of do dovetail some things around quantum computing, what Elon Musk is trying to do with sort of his mind link stuff, sorry about the sirens, you do get to a point where we will deal with technologies in the coming decades that do start altering the fabric of reality when we're talking at the level of human consciousness, which is the fabric of reality as I understand it. My ability to interact. And that's, of course, to some extent, that's something we're already doing. The fact that I am sitting in my apartment in Harlem speaking to 72 people on one level, where it also, if you saw this 20 years ago, it would just look like some weirdo shouting at his television. We're already screwing with the fabric of reality in that way. And I think it would probably be U.S. research universities and U.S. companies that have been at the forefront of altering reality in those ways. It's entirely possible that aspects of that, as I think they have probably with certain payment systems, could shift to China. And I see that as honestly more of an exciting prospect than a terrifying one, because I think, as I've made clear on videos, I'm a lot more complacent about the status of U.S. power and the idea that the Chinese are a real rival than many others are. Wow. Ante Rantamaki. Does Russia control the fabric of the universe? Man, you guys are we're getting on a different level here. How could I talk about Russia controlling the fabric of the universe? I think Russia has less impact on the fabric of the universe than it has, at any point. If you want to talk about mucking with the fabric of the universe, it's sort of technologically, speaking about the fabric universe as human consciousness, I think in the early years of the Soviet experiment, I think were probably the peak years for the Russian ability to toy with the fabric of the universe, because of the way that the idea of setting up a really functioning communist Soviet state, I think fairly quickly, within just a few decades, it became very clear that it was, or at least clear to many, that it was just another variety on human exploitation. But to toy with the fabric of the universe, to toy with the possibilities frontier. Man, I love this. This is just seeing how I can deal with progressively more ridiculous questions in progressively more ridiculous ways. When it comes to a question of like who was pushing the possibilities frontier of human consciousness and human understanding of its place in the world, I think Russia's most significant years were probably from 1917 to, I don't know, when did the bloom really come off the rose? Probably at some point in the 1930s, when folks were beginning to realize what this new attempt at the fabric of reality was doing to the fabric of the abilities of Ukrainians to feed themselves. So no, I do not believe Russia controls the fabric of the universe. What is China's top tech? I think we were talking potentially about, oh my God, it just keeps going. What is China's top tech? I think we were talking about quantum entanglement. I intentionally sort of jumped ahead, name required, to talk about that. Matt Ellman says French language in Africa has had deviations. It's going to be like Arabic in Africa with all of its dialects. I've been listening to a lot of Tunisian Arabic recently, and it's just fascinating the ways in which French and Arabic sort of interplay. It's quite beautiful, frankly. It's just fascinating the way that whole thing works. Okay. Where are we at here? Why is France so comically terrible for Africa? Asked Angel Ballantyne. That's a great question. Alan, I truly appreciate your educated, unbiased content, Rob. I'd appreciate videos devoted to Libya as done with Tunisia, personally. Thanks and peace. Thank you, Alan. I did a Libya. In the past month, I've done both a Libya and a Tunisia video, Alan. I mean, thank you. Thank you for the super chat. I just want to point out, I feel that I've been meeting that need. I do intend to do more Tunisia videos, and as things develop in Libya, I would like to do more Libya videos. I don't know whether I'll be doing another Libya video this year. I intend to do at least another couple Tunisia videos this summer. All right, any more super chats? We got any more? Matt Ellman asks, does Turkey control the fabric of the universe? I would say that Turkey absolutely controlled the fabric, not of the universe, but of Western civilization in very serious ways in the 1400s and 1500s. It is underestimated, dramatically underestimated, the extent to which the Ottoman Empire's conquest, not just of Constantinople, but also its conquest of much of Europe. I mean, making it to the doorway of Vienna on multiple occasions, conquering aspects, taking parts of Italy at some times, had a tremendous influence on the way that sort of the Western civilization, as was, saw the world and saw it as existentially important that it, cast itself across the seas and primarily down to India, around Africa. I mean, it was this tremendously important forcing function that changed the world in dramatic ways. But I haven't seen, and I mean, that's not true. Ataturk was tremendously influential for Ataturk as a vision of a non-Western modernizing leader that was able to be victorious against the British Empire at Çanakkale, or Gallipoli, as the Australians call it, was a tremendously significant event for just Asia in general, Africa, the whole colonized world. So, yeah, underappreciated. But Mohammed Khan says, hi, can you talk about the Turkish defense industry? Is it all it's said to be? Turkish drones are important, are interesting, and are really intimidating to the United States, which would like to, charge hundreds of millions of dollars for every functioning drone. Whereas I don't know what the Turkish price points are, but they're charging much less for drones that can do a lot more damage, which makes a lot more sense. So yeah, I think that aspect of the Turkish defense industry is fascinating. and very important. And honestly, it's probably the most important aspect of the defense industry, where like Turkey can't, independently create an F-35 or whatever, but who fucking cares? It's fighter jets. Like those aren't useful anymore. Okay, any more super chats? You guys have already been extraordinarily generous. We've been doing this for 2.5 hours. I don't really know how we got to particle physics and the fabric of reality, but thank you for bringing us there. Name required. I am Robert Morris. You can subscribe. Please do subscribe, like, comment. I write books. You can buy them. Twitter at Robbo Law. Instagram at More Freedom Foundation. And thank you so much. This has been a ton of fun, and you guys have been super generous today, and I'm very grateful. Thank you, and goodbye. Oh, that's a great question, Mohammed Gamadi. Why don't you talk about Saudi Arabia anymore? Because I have been working on a video about Saudi Arabia and Yemen for a fucking 1.5 years now. And I really need to finish it and get it out. And then I have some other things I want to say about Saudi Arabia. And it's also really stupid because I think my Saudi Arabia videos are the videos people most want me to see, and Turkey videos. And I just don't do many of them anymore, which is dumb. All right, thanks. Thanks, folks. All right, I think we're good. Thank you so much. Wow.